it good? Hi. I'm Alex Band. I'm the product manager at the RPKI.
Oh, the mic isn't working. Okay.
No, the mic isn't working.
Let's take a look.
Is it switched on? No, it's not. Is that better? Yes. There we go. Okay. Well, like I said, I'm Alex Band. I'm the product manager at the RPKI. Over the last 4 years, we have been working on a production RPKI system. And over the course of time, we learned quite some things, which is something I would like to talk to you about over the next half hour. Ultra quick intro. For those of you who don't know what RPKI is, essentially, in this system, the regional internet registries, they become a certificate authority. They have a self-signed X509 certificate that has all of the resources that the regional internet registry manages. And from that, LAR, so ISPs, they can request a certificate containing their internet number resources. This certificate can then subsequently be used to make statements about your resources. And that statement can really be anything. But the implementation that we've done is to use this for BGP origin validation. So essentially, you can make a statement about what is allowed with regards to BGP routing with your IP addresses. And this statement is called a root origin authorization. And a root origin authorization essentially says, I authorize this autonomous system to originate these of my IP addresses. And that's very much like a root object does in the IRR. Aroa has one additional data point, and that is the maximum prefix length. And that essentially says, I authorize this AS to deaggregate this prefix up until this point. If they announce it any more specific, then it's not authorized. You put all of these statements together in one big repository, and then any operator anywhere in the world can download all of these statements and start comparing them to real-life BGP. And, well, if you see a BGP announcement and it has a ROA that covers it, then that makes them happy. And if there is a BGP announcement and the ROA says, well, it's not supposed to be coming from that AS, or it is too specific and that is unauthorized, then that makes the operator unhappy. And basically, on those two things, you can make decisions. And you can make whatever decision you like. Now, that is what it does. But then you go, but don't we already have a system for that? Don't we have the Internet Routing Registry, like the RDB, and the RIPE database is also an IRR. And in fact, there are 34 IRRs in the world. But the thing is that they're not all that reliable. I mean, the RIPE database, for example, it employs security. You need to authenticate against the inetnum objects in the database in order for you to actually create a root object. But if you take all of those 34 IRRs together, they don't have that level of authentication. And also, data quality in the IRRs is maybe not all that bad. So once you start asking operators, well, would you like to have a reliable way to tell if a root announcement is supposed to be out there, yes or no? If you really bring it down to the basis and you leave aside all knowledge of how the system that we've been using up to now work and the current reality of it, if you really ask that question, then most of them go, oh yeah, I would love to have that information. I would love to know of the 500,000 root announcements that are out there, whether they're supposed to be out there, yes or no. So on that premise, on that basis, we started building a system to answer that question in a reliable way. And this is also the added value that we try to give over the Internet Routing Registry system, to make it validatable, to make it reliable, and to have an accurate and complete data set. That is the goal here. That is what we're doing. So the RPKI actually started working on this in 2006. We made like little prototypes and we tried out different things. And then we launched an open beta somewhere in mid-2010 to work with operators to get some operational feedback to see how they would use such a system and what their needs are and how we would need to set it up. And then on the 1st of January 2011, all of the 5 RERs committed to having an operational service. Now, and especially in the RIPE NCC, that was very, very complicated because not everybody, not all address space is the same. We have this weird stuff with flavors of IP addresses. We have so-called provider aggregatable, but we also have provider independent space, and then there's all that legacy space, and there's so-called minority space where the majority RER, so the /8 block where it comes out of, actually is lying within a different regional internet registry. We were like, oh man, if we're going to tackle all of that on the get-go, we're never going to get anything working. So we decided to only do member space, regular provider aggregatable space. And then, of course, when you start talking about certificate authorities, then in a perfect world, everybody would run their own CA. You would generate your own private and public key pair, and you would have it signed by the root certificate authority, in this case, the RIPE NCC. So everybody would be responsible for running their own CA and for their own publication, et cetera, et cetera. That is how the system is designed. Because any security expert would tell you, well, if you're going to do something certificate and X509 related, you better be the holder of your own private key, right? But before I was a product manager, I gave training courses. I did training courses for the RIPE NCC, and one of them was DNSSEC training courses. And this was in a time that none of the TLDs were signed. And I would try to teach people without any of the available tools to do a key rollover, for example, to set up their own little secure DNSSEC island. And by the time you got to step 12, wait for the time to live to pass, and then move on to step 13, and then talk about your own signing key, they were like, really? Really? I'm doing all of this just to set up my own little secure DNSSEC island? And if I mess it up, I make my entire zone unavailable? Why would I put in all of that effort? Because the return on investment, arguably, is very, very small. So we were like, you know what? Let's set up a hosted system. And that's a security trade-off, where essentially you're saying, OK, you can request a certificate with your resources on it, but we're going to put it on a hardware security module that resides within the RIPE NCC data center. If you trust us to run such a service for you, then please go ahead, and you can feel free and request a certificate. And we'll set up a pilot system that you can talk to in case you want to run your own certificate authority. And we were like, OK, let's just see where this goes. Because we made a conscious decision to keep it simple. We needed to gain operational experience as well, because we had no experience running a certificate authority. We wanted to gather user feedback as much as possible. And then within the hosted system, we tried to automate all of the crypto complexity, take away the worry of key rollovers, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Because ultimately, if you're going to ask people, do you want a reliable system where you can make statements about your routing, and they have to worry about setting up their own CA, and they have to worry about doing their own key rollovers, what are they getting in return? Especially if you're an early adopter. You're putting in all that effort, you're getting nothing in return. So we try to avoid making people jump through burning hoops. And how do we do that? Well, we completely automated all of the signing, setting up the certificate, resource changes, for example. So if you got new resources from the RER, they would be automatically added to your certificate, and a new updated one would be published. If you return resources, or if you transfer resources, a new updated certificate would automatically be generated and be published. We were like, if we're going to take care of all of the crypto, we don't need to show it in the interface either. So all of those hashes and SIA pointers and AAA pointers, we don't need any of that. The only thing that a user really needs to worry about is setting up their ROAS, making sure that what they publish actually matches their intended BGP configuration. That was the goal. Well, if you bring it back to what a ROA really is, this AS is authorized to originate these of my prefixes, and this is how much they can deaggregate it. You could bring it down to 3 input fields in the submit button. AS number, prefix, max length, submit. Should be easy enough. And then we were like, yeah, well, maybe we can do a little bit better. Maybe we can make it a little bit user-friendly. So this was our first stab. This is the first thing that we came up with. Let's see if it works. Now we get to the tricky bit with animation. There we go. This is the first thing we did, like a drag and drop interface. And it was 2011, and I tell you, I was really proud because I thought it was really fancy. And this was a typical case of form over function. We went a little bit overboard with, this is so easy. Look, so this is what happened. You could fill it in an AS number, and then you could give it a very descriptive name, and then you could drag one of your resources in there and click it and edit it, and then enter a maximum prefix length. And we also had validity times that you could set, and it even supported v6 and everything. We were like, wow, that's great. This is awesome. People will use this and love this because it's intuitive and stuff. And now, well, people were interested because we talked about it. And I remember having a conversation with the lead developer because in this pilot system, we had 90 CAs. We had 90 LARs who said, I want to try this out because this looks like fun. And he was like, OK, on the 1st of January, when we're going to go to production, we're going to throw all of that out. And then we're going to start with a clean slate. I was like, no, but we'll never get those 90 back. It'll take years. Because I was expecting sort of an adoption like IPv6 and DNSSEC, sort of slow, especially as a brand new technology. But no, we had like 226 certificates in the first month. So yay. And that's because it was really easy. You just had to click the, yeah, sure, give me a certificate button. And then you set up a CA, and we took care of everything. And then people were like, where's my PI address space? Where's my minority space? Where's my IREX space? So people actually apparently cared about all of the things that we weren't doing. So it's like, OK, there's interest. People want this, surprisingly. But almost nobody created ROAS. And I think when you saw that animation that I showed you earlier, you can see why. People were like, what? What do I do now? You know, I don't know. Does this affect any of my BGP? Because if it affects my BGP, I'm not going to touch it. I need to be sure that this is reliable. So nobody created ROAS, and out of the ones that did, they are really, really good at making bad ROAS. Because if you create a ROA, you can make one of your BGP announcements valid. But you need to be sure that once you start creating them, you create them for all of the announcements that you do, all of them. So all of your customer announcements as well. Because if you don't, then they will all be flagged as unauthorized. They will be flagged as a hijack. But people are like, you know what? I just created one for my aggregate, for my own AS, and that's pretty good as a start. And they didn't realize that they created one valid, and in the process, they created 50 customer invalids. And that isn't right. And it's because the interface didn't show any of that. So we had awful, awful data quality. There were more invalids in the system than valids. It was like, if any operator is going to be interested in using this, yeah, you sort of go back to the initial idea of the IRR system, where awful data quality is the thing that you were trying to combat. You wanted to make something more reliable, not something that has a bunch of crap data. So what did people do wrong? Mostly it's that maximum length thing, because in the standards, it said if you leave the maximum length field blank, then it is as strict as possible. So if you have a /16, and you don't define the maximum length, then any more specific, like /21, /24s, they're all invalid. And people are like, I don't know what this maximum length thing is, so I'm just going to leave it blank for now. And then in the process, create lots of invalids. The other thing was that people didn't really understand that this is supposed to be about BGP origin. So they were creating ROAS for lots of upstream things, like 3 hops down the line. And I was like, why? What are you doing? So so people don't know what they originate in BGP. They have no idea. And I still get these questions today. It's like, really? Is that what we're announcing? I was like, yeah, really. So the created ROAs, they didn't match the BGP announcements at all. Nobody understood maximum length. And also, and that is also really complicated in the way that the standards were set, it doesn't really give you a lot of insight into what more specifics do. So more specific overlaps, but also less specific overlaps, and also partial overlaps. So if you create a ROA that only partially overlaps with what you're actually announcing, then what will happen? None of those side effects were clear. People didn't know how to solve that. And plus, you know, we were sort of advertising, if you want to run your own CA, we're trying to get some operational experience as well. Let us know. We'll handhold you through the process. And then we sort of had one LAR who was interested in running their own CA. I was like, really? Come on. You should be wanting this, right? But nobody cared. OK. So then you start thinking, how do we improve this? And then this whole delegated CA thing, we sort of put it on the back burner because it was like, I want more people testing this in pilot before we take it to production. Because otherwise, it's going to be a little bit pointless. And maybe we should show people which announcements they do. That would be fun. And then educate people about the maximum prefix length, how that is important. You actually need to fill it in and be really careful about it. And we were like, you know what? Let's also add an alerting system. So if you do a new announcement with one of your with one of your prefixes, and you have a new entry in the list, then we would send you an email saying, you have a new announcement and it has a status unknown. Maybe you should go into the system and create a ROA for it. Also, if you change your BGP configuration and something might inadvertently be invalid, it would also send you a warning email. And if somebody was hijacking you, it would also send you a warning email. So that was kind of good. And this whole drag and drop thing, we needed to get it just needed to get rid of it. The UI just needed to be more intuitive. So, our second stab. This is what we came up with. And I thought this was amazing. Again, I thought it was amazing. And it kind of was, in the sense that this was great for new users. Because what we did here in this BGP root validity column is that we took the RIPE-N2C root collectors that sort of give you a bird's eye view of all of the root announcements that happen on the internet at any given point in time, and we refresh that every 9 hours. We just overlay everything that the root collectors see with your certified address space. And if we would show people, like, these are all of the announcements that you're doing with your address space. And this is also where this surprised reaction came from. People went like, really? I do those announcements? I had no idea. I told these people to stop doing that. But apparently they're still doing it. Let me give them a call. This is really interesting. Why didn't I know this before? So in the root validity column in that table, it says valid for all of them. So you would start that with a clean slate. It would say everything would be unknown. Great. And you could put check marks in front of all of the authorized root announcements, and you could hit that blue button that says suggest ROA. Because, well, they're best practices. We could help people. If you don't know what to do, we'll suggest a ROA for you. OK, so that's kind of good. And we also added this product tour, where you would be guided through all of the basic concepts on how to do it. So that would sort of be it. So the key differences here, focus on all of the BGP announcements. So use the root collectors to support all of this. Do a product tour, suggest ROAs based on best practices, and also show the effects before you publish. So if you would create a ROA, it would give you an overview of all of the affected BGP announcements, saying, if you publish this now, this is what will happen, just so you know. And then if you were completely happy with the result, you could hit publish and go. And lastly, like I said, email alerts. So what we saw, dramatic increase in uptake. It was kind of unbelievable. And a vast, vast improvement in data quality. We have data accuracy now that is in the high 90%. And even that is like a flattered number, because there's quite a few LARs that I contacted saying, you have lots of invalids. And it went like, yes, we know. Those are our customers that are still announcing more specifics, and we told them repeatedly not to do that. And now we just created a ROA for our aggregate, and now they're just all flagged as invalid. They're supposed to be invalid. It's like, oh, okay. So like 200 to 300 invalid root announcements in our repository, they're actually properly invalid. And if you would want to drop them, you're rightfully doing that. But the problem with this UI was, it's great for new users, but if you would have like an invalid root announcement somewhere, it would be very hard to track which ROA is actually causing it. So it was great for new users, but it was really bad for existing users in sort of maintaining all of the stuff that they had already created. So they had invalids, but they wouldn't know how to fix them. And also the way we set up that interface and the technology that we used behind it, it was wicked and it was sort of old and a bit crufty. So if you want to delete something, you would hit a button and it would refresh the page. And that really wasn't very 2014. So we were like, you know, we could do better. But this whole suggest ROA thing, I was doing monthly webinars at that point explaining this thing. And I was convinced that everybody was using this suggest ROA feature. I was like, why would you use anything else? But, you know, network operators, they know better. And they don't want help. They want to do that shit themselves. And they want to be in the driver's seat. I don't need your stinking suggestions. I want to do this myself. Look, no hands. I'm in control. OK. And the fact that this whole do this stuff manually, that was really hidden on the second page, because it was like, we don't have to design it around that. But it turned out that after we added event tracking, that more than half of the users was creating ROAs manually and wasn't using any of the suggest features. So it's just a bad design choice that we made. So we were like, you know what? Let's put this front and center and put everything together on a single page. And then also give a better indication of problematic ROAs. So stuff that you created, and then at a later point it turns invalid, and it shows you exactly which ROA is causing a problem and how it is affecting certain BGP announcements. And then, of course, we had this discussion again about running your own CA. And the feedback that we got was, you know what? I don't really need to run my own CA, but since I'm managing 500 BGP announcements, clicking around in your web interface, it's really getting tedious. I don't really want to do that anymore. So do you maybe have a RESTful API so I could just talk to your backend system? And we're like, sure, we can do that. And then we also added two-step verification, because that sort of applies to all of our services. Is also an important change that we made to make sure that we just lock everything down in a better way. And we wanted to future-proof it in order to sort of make a new platform on which we could extend functionality a lot easier, because the current one was really stretching the limits of what it could handle. So this is our third step, so third generation UI. After everything that we learned along the way, this is what we came up with. And it shows you at the top a summary. There's 41 BGP announcements that the RIPE-NCC does. This example is actually RIPE-NCC address space. 4 of them are valid. 1 is invalid. There are still 36 that are unknown. And this is caused by the 4 ROAs you created. And 3 of them are OK, and 1 of them is causing a problem. And the way that this interface works is you essentially put check marks in front of all of the authorized root announcements, and then you say, create ROAs for selected BGP announcements. And then in the bottom right corner, we have this button that says review and publish changes, because you just made 3 changes, and you may want to have a look at what that does. So these are the ROAs, and those are the affected announcements. And if you're happy, you can just hit publish. We added some filter buttons so you can see what is valid, and maybe you want to hide all of that because you care about what is unknown. And then in the ROAS section, you can see this one is causing a problem. If you click it, it's like, so that ROA is causing an invalid length. Let's fix it. You can create a new ROA. You can extend the maximum length of an existing ROA, or look, ma, no hands, I'm going to do a manual fix, because that is what users want. They want to be in the driver's seat. You review your changes again, and it will go from invalid to valid. You publish, and off you go. And now in the top right corner, you see there are now 0 ROAS causing problems. The thing is that because we brought everything back to a single page, and you have 3 tabs, essentially your BGP announcement view, you have your ROA point of view, so the BGP announcements and the related ROAS, and on the other page you have your ROAS and their related BGP announcements. And the third tab is your entire audit history. So every step that every user took to get to the stage where you're at now, to see who messed around in your system. And this is a good starting point for adding additional functionality. Because we got to this point by gathering lots and lots and lots of feedback. And we do that because all of this functionality is part of a routing security training course that the RIPE NCC does twice a month. We do monthly webinars where we talk like 20 people who sign up for that through the entire system and explain to them how all of this works. We talk about this at operator meetings and at regional meetings. We make sure that we use social media in a good way, because building a community like that really gives you the feedback to make all of these constant improvements. Come on. And there's lots going on in the community. Of course, there are the open source RPKI tools. They are available on rpki.net. There's also the SurfNet RPKI dashboard with lots of statistics and lots of detailed information on what the RPKI uptake is. It's an integral part of the route monitoring that BGPmon does. You can even query whois.bgpmon.net and get RPKI-related output straight back. It'll tell you whether it's RPKI valid, yes or no, and how it's affected and which ROAS cause it. And then, of course, we have our own GitHub page with, for example, the RPKI validator, the relying party software that we have, which is also BSD licensed, open source, and we get lots of input and lots of contributions from the community in order to help this. So there's lots of activity out there. So what do operators now tell us? What they really tell us is we want data faster. If there is new information out there, currently all of these RPKI validators, these relying party tools, they're kind of slow. They used to update every 4 hours, and now they update every 2 hours, but operators really want this in minutes. As soon as there's something new out there, they just want to know about it. Again, running the delegated model is just not that interesting. The only compelling argument that I heard right now was an organization who has resources from all of the 5 regional internet registries. So if they would make a change, then they need to log into one of the 5 interfaces. And those are 5 different interfaces. And they don't want to deal with that. So they're like, you know what? If we run our own CA, we have everything in one centralized place, and we could just manage everything. And that is currently, well, I think the best argument for doing that. The other thing is we used to have still root objects, and now we have still ROAS. There's lots of people who go in, make changes, don't enable the alerting system, and then they just walk away and forget about it, and then you have stale data. Also, what you have with root objects is if there is one missing, people are very keen to add a new one. But who has ever removed the root object? It's like, oh, that's old cruft, let's just get rid of it. Nobody does that. There's lots and lots of cruft. It's actually the same with ROAS. There's lots of unused ones. So there are way more ROAS than are actually necessary to validate all of the BGP announcements. And then the last complaint is you have these 3 statuses with RPKI. Essentially, something can be valid, so it's covered by a ROA. It can be invalid, because it's coming from an unauthorized AS, or it is more specific than is allowed by the maximum length. But there's no way to distinguish between those 2 in my router. Whereas operators say, well, I think actually one is less of an offense than the other. If it's coming from an authorized AS, but it's just too specific, that is less of an offense than an invalid, where it's truly coming from an unauthorized AS. But there's no way to distinguish between that. For example, in your Cisco and Juniper routers, you can only create a route map based on invalid. And there's no way to say, OK, let's do one or the other. So that's another thing that we get a lot of feedback about. We We try to sort of circumvent that in our relying party software. We also built in a RESTful API where you can filter on that, but then you can create filters outside of your router. But if you want to use this natively in your router, you don't really have that option. So what are our future plans? If you have such a fancy interface, why not use it for root objects as well? Because right now, if you want to manage your routing data, you essentially have to do it in two completely different places and manage two completely different data sets that have no relation, nothing to do with each other. But because we now have authentication in the right database using single sign-on, as well as two-factor authentication, you could just essentially merge all of that in. So those tabs that I showed you, we could essentially just add a fourth tab, say, root objects. And you could just manage all of your root objects from exactly the same place. Or it could be as simple as adding a single check mark saying, create matching root object for this ROA, or even the other way around. So there's lots of options of playing with that. Then with regards to getting the data out faster, currently all of the fetching of all of the objects out of the repositories is done over rsync. If you know how rsync works, actually in calculating the differences, the server is involved. So if people want data faster, we could just say, sure, let's up the polling time, but we have 11,000 members, and if all of them want new data every minute, and they all start querying our repository over rsync, then 11,000 every minute, that's going to be lots and lots of server stuff that we need to put in order to be capable of handling that. And also the people in the secure inter-domain routing working group, they were like, you know, that is actually something that we should look at. So currently we're building a prototype to replace rsync with something more scalable and something faster, HTTP. Then, of course, ultimately, we'll need to deal with inter-RER transfers. Aaron will run out of address space too. The desire to do more transfers, there's already a transfer agreement, inter-RER transfer agreement between the Aaron region and the APNIC region. Ultimately, the expectation is that will happen for the RIPE-NCC region as well. And then lastly, there's path validation. Because origin validation is fun, but you could still spoof an AS number and then announce something, and it would still, in the current RPKI system, be marked as valid because it doesn't support path validation. And ultimately, I think by the end of the year, this is something that we'll need to start looking at. So everything that I've told you has resulted in this. So when we started our RPKI initiative, in the first month, we got a lot of uptake, and I was really surprised by it. And I was like, well, that's probably going to flatten off. People are going to maybe lose interest. We just got critical mass. Everybody who said, I did DNSSEC, I did IPv6, and I have a lazy Friday afternoon. Let's set up some ROAS. That'll be fun. But it turns out that this just keeps on growing. And the amount of people requesting a certificate, that is fairly constant. But this is what's happening with people creating ROAS. And I think this is the most telling graph with regards to product design and sort of advocating usability of a product. Because this is the day when we launched our second generation UI. The first one, with the drag and drop interface, nobody was creating ROAS, and we had really poor data quality. And from the day we launched the user interface that showed people what they actually originate in BGP, there was an enormous uptake in people creating ROAS. And these were all high-quality ROAS. And right now, if I start looking at the statistics, people are removing ROAS because it's easier to spot craft, and the data quality is going even further up. So this is the effect of putting in effort in making something usable. And that is really what my talk is about, because you could just say, we're going to make it technically work. We're going to make sure that the functionality is in place so users are capable of performing this task, and then call it done. And to be totally honest with you, the RIPE-NCC is very guilty of that too. Just go to our website now and try to sign up as a member. We give you 9 pages of hell. And we don't care. We're a monopoly, right? Where else are you going to go? So we can throw up as many burning hoops, and we disregarded usability for a long time because we didn't need to. And now with this increased focus on usability and really making it user-friendly, you can see that it pays dividends in how your product is perceived and the extent in which your product is used. And it also taught me a lot about early adopters, people who are interested in this new technology and give you feedback on how it is actually being used operationally. Because, like I said in the beginning in 2011, we really had no idea. We really had no idea what we were getting into, and it really helped us shape this user interface that we have now and the adoption that we have now based on all of the feedback that we got from the early adopters. And then lastly, there's lots of education. People understanding this system, if you explain it, really a lot of operators say, why isn't this mandatory? Why isn't everybody just doing this? It just makes sense. It is easy to use, it just works. And then I download this relying party software, I can hook it into my Juniper or my Cisco. It's just an end-to-end system that works. It's fine. And we got a lot of flack. I mean, this hasn't been an easy road. In 2011, you know, the membership even voted on whether we wanted this system, yes or no. And ultimately, I had the feeling that that was a very secluded discussion that happened inside a room, but sort of the general public, the average operator, was like, this is actually kind of a usable system, and I want to invest in this. And now we got like 20% of the membership that has a certificate, and we got almost 9/8 worth of address space that is covered by a ROA. It's a lot of address space. So we got a high-quality, usable data set, and now we can just build further. It's really nice. And what I'm wondering about is, well, this obviously isn't happening in the Aran region, and I'm curious to hear from you why. Any questions or any comments? Thank you very much. See? People at the mic.
Yeah, we have time for a few questions. Thank you.
Randy Bush, IAJ, as usual. Alex, you've done a brilliant job, but there's a basic rule of the internet, and especially the RIRs that you have violated, and that calls all of this into question, which is that you have treated the operators as if they were paying customers. That's just not done. These are slime. We're supposed to throw rules at them and make things difficult and deny them address space and deny them service. You have taken an approach of serving customers, and that's just, you can see the failure.
Sorry. Andrew.
Alex, look, it's no secret that I have my name's Andrew, I'm from Liquid Telecom. It's no secret that I have great reservations about RPKI for various reasons, particularly with regards to handing the RIRs too much control, etc. But leaving those aside, I do have a question. Typically speaking, the RIR model has always worked on a consensus approach. Now, in 2011, my understanding is that a policy was put forward before RIPE that said we'd like RIPE to turn this thing into a production service, and it was withdrawn. At that point, it went to a membership vote in RIPE.
Yeah.
And the second option on that membership vote was whether or not the members felt that RIPE should continue to issue the ROAs. That vote was passed was defeated 120 to 114 with 26 abstentions.
Yeah.
Would you not feel that that violates the consensus model on which the RIRs have been built since time immemorial? It makes me very nervous to see things like that when the consensus model has worked for so long with all other policies, and then we see something like that, because it makes it very clear to me that this is something very controversial and could have huge ramifications on the internet going forward.
Would you like me to comment?
I really would like to hear a response to that.
Yeah, because it was a very complicated time, and it's no secret that this was a very contentious issue, whether the RER should, or let's not speak for all of the RERs, whether the RIPE NCC should offer this service to its members. And ultimately, a certification task force was set up, which also had members of our executive board in it, and ultimately, they didn't want to make a decision by themselves, but they said, you know, in the general meeting, we're going to call a vote. And then ultimately, the vote was passed, albeit with a thin margin, yes, but that is what voting ultimately is. I think we've learned a lot along the way, and I think it also taught the RIPE NCC to be a little bit more humble when it comes to these kinds of delicate issues. And it's definitely something that we learned from. And now that there's a little bit more operational experience with this system, and now that there's more knowledge about how the system works, I think a lot of those fears and a lot of those doubts have been taken away. And I think we're in much better shape. I think I really have the feeling, this is truly, personally speaking, a feeling that if you would have this vote again today, the outcome would actually be a lot more positive. Hiya.
Doug Montgomery Nist. So you talked about using the user interface as sharing that with the IRR data, but you didn't say anything about your ideas of sort of consistency and completeness between the two data sets. Do you have any ideas about using one data set to populate the other, finding inconsistencies from one data set to the other?
Speaking purely for the RIPE database, because you need to authenticate against both the inetnum and the altnum object, so both the prefixes and the AS number in order to create a root object, the data consistency there is actually kind of good. So we could opt to show all of the root announcements and all of the related root objects, and then say, would you like to create matching ROAS? We would have to do an extensive analysis, but we could also just show people, like, these are the root objects that you have, these are the BGP announcements that you do. What do you think in terms of matching the two? Would you like to create matching ROAS for it, or would you like to do this manually? There are different approaches, and we need to analyze it a little bit more in order to make the right design choice.
Okay,
Alex?
we're going to, wrap it with these people. We've got to do it quickly. Thank you.
Yep.
I just ran a script to compare ROAS with IRR data.
Oh.
The extensive analysis is that there are currently 2,667 ROAS for which there is no route object.
Really?
So you got to fix that. And on a side note,
I don't.
why is the RIPE NCC's office prefix 193.0.0.0 not signed? Aren't you not using your own product?
No, that's a good one. That is allocated PI. There is one type, one flavor of address space that is called allocated PI. 9 LARs in the world have that, and we're one of them. And that is being made eligible for RPKI this sprint. It'll be done in 2 weeks. And then all of that will have ROAS, finally. Maybe you go first.
Yeah, so Mark Hoster's Aaron.
Hi.
So I just wanted to comment a little bit from the technical services that Aaron provides, in that we're very close to what you have, with a couple exceptions. We have delegated, we have hosted, we have a RESTful interface to our hosted system, and I encourage you that if you can, to join in the fun.
Yeah, that would be fun, wouldn't it? And maybe we should also align our APIs so people can use the same calls for both.
So actually that brings up something that's, we've talked about this with the regional registries.
Yeah.
The APIs are going to be a little bit different, especially in the Aaron region. And the reason for that is We actually have some measures put into place that only you, as an ISP, can actually create ROAs. And the way that's done is with basically a two-factor authentication approach. And that's also involved in the RESTful API.
Yeah.
And you do not have that within the RIPE region.
No, so the whole non-repudiation part, that was mandatory within the ARIN region. None of the other RERs have that implemented, so that makes it a little bit more complicated for you in order to offer such a service. That's totally true.
Well, we already have and have for about a year and a couple of months now.
Yeah.
Thank
But if I may ask, you have all of that functionality. What is happening with your adoption?
That's a really good question.
And that's what I would really like to hear from the audience.
Okay, one last. Make it quick, please.
Okay, Andrew from Liquid again. Alex, I'm going to ask you a question.
Quick.
If you were sitting in a situation where the RIR was sitting in a country that was willing to sign whatever treaties the ITU threw up at WSIT, on a continent where the continent is full of governments, full of dictators that are loving to sign treaties, that love to withdraw things and exercise complete control, would you be willing to put that kind of power in the hands of an RIR hosted in a region like that? And would you trust an RIR in that situation to sign your routes and potentially affect your route reachability?
Yeah, I'll make it really quick. This is a discussion that we've had over the last couple of years, like, oh my God, RPKI, it's something with certificates and something with signing and cryptography, and it's really powerful. The cryptography that is added to RPKI is meant for validation. Something is signed, allowing the other party to validate. It offers reliability. It is nothing more than a more reliable root object. So you could do the same things with a root object. In addition, if you want to do something really powerful, then you could also say, I'm going to revoke all of your address space for this ISP, deregister them. And that'll make everything disappear. That'll make their database objects disappear, it'll make their certificate disappear, it'll make everything disappear. Their reverse delegations, everything. That is a much more powerful way of shutting down an ISP. Singling out RPKI because this is sort of perceived as something powerful because it deals with something about certificates is just not true. The means to shut down an ISP are already available. And RPKI doesn't really change that. Thank you.
Okay, thanks very much.
Woohoo.